which daemons and services run automatically at that level. The 5 standard Linux run levels are: 0 is halt, 1 is single user mode, and it does not configure network interfaces, it doesn't start daemons, and it doesn't allow non-root logins. 2 is multi-user mode, does not configure network interfaces or start daemons. 3 is multi-user mode with networking, in which case you boot up to a command prompt and you have your daemons and you have networking, but no graphical interface, no genome or KDM. 4 is optional, user definable for specific purposes. 5 is the default in most Linux distributions. It's full multi-user mode with X11, so it launches X Windows, loads the graphical user interface, and genome or KDM and all daemons. And finally, 6 is reboot. The run levels are fairly standard for Linux distributions like Red Hat, Fedora, SUSE, and others. However, Ubuntu is the exception to this rule. Its standard run levels are different from other Linux distributions. The following summarizes the standard Ubuntu Linux run levels. 0 is halt, 1 is single user mode, where it does not configure network interfaces, start daemons, or allow non-root logins. And then run levels 2 through 5 are full multi-user mode. 2 is the Ubuntu default. By full multi-user mode, we mean that it loads the graphical user interface and genome or KDM and all of the daemons. And finally, 6 is reboot. Again, notice that unlike other distributions of Linux, for Ubuntu, run levels 2 through 5 are identical, and the default run level is 2 instead of 5. Run levels are defined by files in the file system. These files are found in the etc directory. Example: the following list of directories for run levels 0 through 6 in the etc folder. Inside these run level directories are links to daemons, shell scripts, and programs that start and stop when that run level is invoked. The links prefixed with S start when that run level is invoked, and the links prefixed with K stop when that run level is invoked. Traditionally, after the grub2 boot process, the init daemon is called in most distributions of Linux. Referred to as the grandfather of all daemons, it takes care of stopping and starting other daemons according to the current run level the system happens to be booting into. Ubuntu is an exception to this particular Linux custom, and is utilizing a daemon called upstart in place of the traditional init daemon. As a result, Ubuntu's run levels do not function as one might expect. There are several command line tools you can use to manage Linux run levels. The first run level displays last and current run levels. If no previous run level exists, it displays N for none. The second, telinit, sets or changes the run level to the argument specified. Beyond these standard tools, there are also other tools for configuring the startup options such as BOM and System 5. Alright, we've looked at how run levels work in Fedora and Red Hat Fedora. Things work quite differently in Ubuntu. Now you still have, your basic run levels in Ubuntu, but they don't do the same thing as they do in Red Hat, and you can't really configure them the same way that you do in Red Hat. So yes, you'd still have run levels 0 through 6. 0 is halt, 1 single user mode, and 6 is reboot. But unlike Red Hat Fedora, run levels 2 through 5 pretty much all do the same thing in Ubuntu. They're all a graph, they load the GNOME Desktop Manager, and so they bring up X Windows in a graphical interface. They're all a multi-user, mode. One of the other things is they've departed from the configuration file. So while in Red Hat you would edit init tab, this file, you'll find that in Ubuntu 10 and Lucid Linux and Maverick Meerkat it doesn't really exist. And then in earlier versions of Ubuntu, they went from etc init tab to sort of an etc event D type configuration. And then they've actually departed from that now as well. And so, again, if we're going to look at this in the etc folder, I'm just going to do a listing here. And let me do a long listing and pipe it to less. And I'm going to go down and we'll look at just some of the, so here are your basic run levels, right? You've got your directories, run level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So in that aspect, the structure is similar. Now the default run level when you boot up is run level 2. And if I use the command run level, you can see when I boot it up, the N means that there has been no previous run level that I've used telinit or the init command to get to. and this is my default run level when I first boot up Ubuntu. But if I were to go, let's go into that directory and see what it looks like, or see what happens. So RC, let me do, okay, and let me do, and I'll just do a long listing here. Well, I'm going to do a short listing. And then you can see these are some of the scripts that run, in this case, and fan control, kernel loops, different things that run at that run level. And if I were to cat readme, it would tell me in Ubuntu. If I want to disable any of these, notice that I would rename it, and I would have to prefix it with the K. And if I want to enable it, I want to prefix it with an S. So all of these you can see are enabled because they have an S in front of them. And if for some reason I wanted to, or I desired to disable one of this, I would simply rename it and put a K in front of it instead. Alright, so that's one aspect of the run level system. Now there is an init folder in Ubuntu, and you can see that there are various configuration files here. And in addition, there's also an initd folder, and I'm just going to do, again, I'm going to do a long listing. We'll go through, and notice that there's a gdm-conf file here, and this is actually what we'll want to do later. If we want to set it up so that we can kind of boot to the equivalent of a scaled down server mode, or where we're not running a graphical environment. So we'll make use of that later. But let's also take a look at one more configuration folder. Init is really what we want, but I'm going to recurse or back up one directory, and I'm going to go to init.d, and we'll look in this folder. And again, a lot of times when you start or stop services, you'll use scripts in this folder or links. For instance, if I were going to restart networking or start or stop the networking service, notice that here I have like network manager and I have networking, and this is the an actual link to the script that I would want to access or utilize to stop, start, or restart that particular service. And so while I'm in this folder, I could just type in networking. But even if I weren't, let's say that I was in root, I could do sudo and etc, and then initd and networking, and I could do restart here. And if I did, notice that I just restarted my networking service there. And then I had to redo that because that was an unknown interface enumerated by network manager. But let me go back to the init folder. And before I do, if I manually wanted to stop the GNOME Desktop Manager, I could do that. I could say sudo service gdm and stop, and that would shut everything down. Well, if I spelled service right, gdm stop, and then I could say sudo service gdm start. Now, again, you might be asking, well, why would I want to run my Ubuntu machine without X Windows or without GNOME? And think about it. If you look at the processes, here's all of the running system processes, and let's look at all the ones that relate to GNOME and GDM. So ps aux, and let me grep for GDM. These are all the processes related to the GNOME Desktop Manager. And what about all the ones related to GNOME? So there's a lot of memory and a lot of CPU cycles being consumed and used just for this graphical environment. But it can be very convenient and very useful and very efficient once you've configured your server graphically. If you shut down GNOME, and if you shut down X Windows and the graphical environment, you can kind of make use of some more CPU cycles and some more memory. And if you think about it, on a server, if it's a web server or a Samba file server, an FS server, Apache, or you want to use an FTP server, NIST server, a Puppet, a Puppet Master server, whatever, you don't necessarily need the GUI when you're not configuring something. If it's just sitting there on the network as a server, it makes more sense to shut down the things on that system that you don't need. And so to sort of optimize the efficiency, the way I would do it, if I wanted to set that up at boot so that I wouldn't run that graphical environment, Unlike Fedora, where I would just set it to default to run level 3, in Ubuntu, I would want to go into etc and init, and I need to make use of my configuration file. So I have gdm-conf. This is actually what I want to edit here. And I'm going to do sudo nano and gdm.conf. I'm really late tonight, lots of coffee and lots of Butterfingers. But, I could modify any of these settings, but I'm just going to comment out these lines here. And I'll leave the stop there, stop on run level 016-bit. And then I'm going to save this file. And so when I reboot, what's going to happen is it's not going to actually load GNOME. So it's going to bring me into sort of a text-only mode or console mode. Even still, my services, this right now is an FTP server. That server will still be running. It'll still serve out FTP pages, but sans the extra CPU cycles in memory to run my graphical desktop. So to test this out, I'm just going to reboot, sudo reboot. I really can't type tonight. Sudo reboot, okay. And let's bring this up into a text-only mode. Okay, now I'm in a text-only mode. And I'm just going to log in and okay. And so in this text-only mode, again, if you look, I still have my FTP server running. So let me try FTP localhost. And notice, welcome to the FTP service on Raptor 3. Anonymous access has been enabled for your downloading pleasure and convenience. And I'll just do an anonymous login. So everything is, as far as my server daemons and services, they're still running, but I don't have the added expense of, running, again, if I were going to look at my processes, there are no such GDM processes running, okay? And let's take a, look at GNOME. All right, so that's a lot of memory, that's a lot of CPU cycles that I can apply towards serving out files via my FTP server or Apache 2 web server or my Samba, Windows file server, and optimize the performance better on this Ubuntu machine. And then, if for some reason I need to log on the machine and change some things or configure some things and I don't want to be in a text-only environment, no problem. I can just say sudo and gdm to launch the GNOME Desktop Manager. Let me authenticate with my password, and it'll go ahead and start launching X Windows. Well, if I type the password right. And it'll launch X Windows and bring up Ubuntu. Now I can go in here and change the things that I want to, that I need to change. In addition to sudo gdm, you can also use start X to launch the X server. And again, that'll bring up the X server and the default window manager. Right here from the console, I can go into the etc folder, a init folder, and notice, here's gdm.conf right there. So if I want to, I can do sudo nano and gdm.conf and supply my password. And let me just go through and pull out these comment tags. Okay, so and I'm going to save it. Yes. And just reboot. And when I do that, once again, this becomes my default login. So I have a GNOME desktop, GDM and X Windows is running each time I boot and go to run level 2 on my Ubuntu system. In addition to going into the etc folder and init and editing the gdm.conf and just commenting out the start options, there are a couple of other tools that you can install if you want to use apt-get. And so I'm going to do sudo apt-get install. And the very first one I'm going to do is bum. All right. In this case, bum just stands for boot up manager. Once it's installed, I can use sudo and run the utility, and it just kind of gives me a graphical configuration tool. So as you know, Ubuntu kind of moves into Upstart and away from init, the init daemon, and as they kind of move, you know, to do their own thing away from the traditional Linux and away from Red Hat, you know, odds are this is going to change fairly rapidly, and perhaps these tools will become, you know, their configuration will be more or less different. But I'm going to click on the advanced options, and I can go to services, and another tool that you might try, we'll go ahead and clear this, and I'm going to do sudo apt-get install, and this other tool is simply sysv or system5, I guess, you know, the old Unix system5 rc conf. Oops, and if I could type install, and let me go ahead and put this. And this is just a text-based configuration tool. Sudo, and let me do, let's see, sys5 rc conf. Alright, and so if I wanted to use this tool, again, I could go here and, you know, I could enable or disable GDM across the board here, but, you know, even being disabled all the way across the board as it is, it still loads at run level 2. So you'll probably at this point want to use, just edit the